So the inaugural SP Plus rankings take into account three things, which is returning production, recent recruiting, and recent history. The most recent one of these was done in back in February. So you look at, Tennessee did add a late addition to their recruiting class in Emmanuel Okoye, who's going to be in this class, so that upgrades them a little bit.
Okay.
On top of that, you still look at returning production, players who enter the portal. Tennessee hasn't lost really anybody to the portal that matters since that time.
True.
And so that is where you get them moving up to number 6. They were, and by the way, for those who don't know, Bill Connelly was very, very high on Tennessee last year. He had them at number 9 when most people didn't have Tennessee a top 25 program. So this isn't something to sniff at, really. And I think that the biggest thing here that Connelly does well is he does value returning production with recent history. What that means is returning production to him is only valuable if you've been successful in the past with that production. And that's where Tennessee comes into play a lot, because they still have returning production and they've had success with this production.
Okay, so who are the teams ranked ahead of Tennessee right now?
Georgia, even though they lost a lot, their recent history and their recruiting is just through the roof. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, and Penn State.
Okay. I can't argue with any of those except for Penn State. I just think James Franklin will find a way to mess it up, to be honest with you. I don't think he's a good game coach at all. And I'm talking about
You mean like when he burned 2 timeouts on a 4th and 6 to call a quarterback draw?
That would be it. But yeah, I'm talking about end of the year where they'll end up. So that's fine if Bill's numbers add up to this and Tennessee 6. But Tennessee being 6, I think, is incredibly strong, especially when you look at the factors that I don't believe he is weighing in, and that would be schedule, right? I mean, he's not weighing that, and he's not predicting where they finish. He's predicting their strength right now, correct?
Correct. He's predicting their strength right now. It has nothing to do with strength of schedule or anything like that. That's what the FPI is for. But the fear was that Tennessee might fall in the SP Plus rankings because they didn't add a lot of elite talent since February, and they rose. So this is a very, very big deal. And look, the team right behind them is LSU. Then there's Oregon, then Texas, and USC, and that rounds out the top 10. Florida State is number 11. Again, I think one of the hard parts with this recent history thing is you look at someone's record and where they finished ranked, but it's hard to determine if they, Florida State finished 10-3 last year and finished ranked in the top 12. I don't think they deserve to be ranked in the top 12. I think their 10-3 would have been a 6-7 in the SEC, or even the Big Ten for that matter, because they played such a horrible schedule. Because the ACC is, Dave, you'll love this. Josh Pate had a great point, which people are trying to say that the ACC is better than the Big Ten because they have more playoff wins. Well, Clemson has all those playoff wins. Okay, take out Clemson, and the ACC is god awful the past 7 years.
Longer than that. I mean,
yeah,
you'd have to go back to Vautech with Mike Vick making a run.
That was when they were in the Big East, so that doesn't even count.
Oh, you're right. It doesn't. I mean, other than Clemson, who've they?
Florida State in 2013. Early 2010s when Florida State and Clemson were both powerhouses.
Okay. Florida State is the obvious one. Sometimes Florida State feels like it just feels like they shouldn't even be in the ACC because of their history and being dominant at times. But yeah, I'm trying to think back. I guess Mac Brown, the first time at North Carolina, had things going pretty good. I think David Cutcliffe had Duke going at a competitive level, but there's a glass ceiling, of course, there when it's not basketball. So, yeah, I mean, other than Clemson in a generation, what do you really have?
Nothing. And that's where I say that, because the debate, here's the question.
Florida State and Clemson. I left them out again. Sorry.
And and Dave, I would ask you that obviously the SEC just dominates everybody. Which gap is bigger? The gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, or the gap between the Big Ten and the other Power 5 conferences?
Say that one more time.
Okay, so the SEC there's a huge gap between everybody in the SEC. It dominates every other conference. But which gap is bigger? The gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, or the gap between the Big Ten and every other conference behind the Big Ten?
Okay, based off what I saw last year on the field, and this could change in a year. I'm not doing this really as far as a generational thing, which may be what you're driving at. But I would say, factoring in a little bit of recent history, not just last year, I would say that the SEC is a 10, that the Big Ten is an 8, and that the closest other conference, pick whichever one you want, is a 5.
Okay, so the Big Ten is closer than the SEC than any other conference is to the Big Ten or the SEC, for that matter. I
Yes.
guess. Okay.
Yeah,
I would agree.
and I think you could argue that the Big Ten last year was a 9.
And by the way, don't sleep on the Big Ten is getting, because of all this money with these TV deals, provided they can work it out, they're getting some really good coaches come to the Big Ten. I mean, Luke Fickell to Wisconsin was a great hire. Matt Rule to Nebraska is a great hire. Whatever you want to say, they're in the Big Ten. Lincoln Riley's at USC, and that was a heck of a hire. And Chip Kelly's still at Oregon. And so
it is funny how sometimes we overlook coaches in all these conversations. And if you got money, you can go hire a coach. Sure, you can pay NIL guys, but is there any one player that Tennessee's gotten through the transfer portal that is worth more than Josh Heupel?
No, not at all.
I mean, even Hooker and Milton were transfers, but still, would you? Yeah, I wouldn't take just one over Josh Heupel. I don't know that you could come up with 3 transfers. If you wanted to lump together Milton, Hooker, and Dante Thornton, would you take them over Josh Heupel? No. Silly question, because they don't get them without him, but.
And Alabama, no one talks about this, but this was the only reason the SEC wasn't lapping the field in the 90s, because in the 90s you had a few other conferences, was because the SEC was probably the dumbest conference at coaching hires. They were so stuck in sticking within the family. And, you want the SEC guy. Alabama reset the standard with Nick Saban, didn't they? They said, hey, we're going to unload all the money we have to get the most high-profile coach we can get and not care what anybody says. And that totally changed the trajectory of hiring coaches in the SEC.
Nope, it completely did. I agree with you. Want to hit on something real quick. One of the most incredible, coolest traditions. So I know there's a lot of younger people that watch, but I think it's one of the most overlooked, amazing traditions that Tennessee has, and it's the retired jerseys. And I'm not talking about Reggie White. I'm not talking about Peyton Manning. I'm not talking about Johnny Majors or Doug Atkins. They all deserve that, but specifically referring to the players who lost their lives in battle, fighting for our country on this Memorial Day. Bill Nolan, Rudy Clare, and of course Willis Tucker and Clyde Fuson. So, again, this is not Lake Day weekend. It's not Pool Day weekend. Remember those, because I don't know about you, Caleb. I could not imagine being in some of those scenarios that those men were in. And in particular, the moments knowing that in some faraway land that you're never going to see your family again. And what they did is there's no amount of worth that can be put on that. It's off the scale. It's off the scale. So think about those people. And I know there are some out there, because we've been in war times recently, that have lost family members, and we just thank you and thank them for their ultimate sacrifice, because that's what this weekend's about, Caleb.
Yeah, and I encourage people, particularly as students of history, to go look at the horrors of losing people in war, in any war, no matter when it is. It's awful and terrible. But look at the horrors of some of the battlefield conditions of World War II and things they were fighting on. It was just. I'll tell you, obviously during World War II, that was the time that the U.S. sided with the communists in the Soviet Union, because they both had a united goal in taking out the Germans. Well, ask the soldiers who were in the Soviet Union, who were having to fight, the U.S. soldiers having to fight in the Soviet Union in the time, having to fight Germany in the Soviet Union. Well, apparently the Russians were indiscriminately brutal and didn't care. even if you were on their side, on the Allies, they were so angry at the Germans for invading Russia, they adopted a scorched earth policy where they burned everything. And they said, we don't care if we die. We just want you to die with us. And that's how brutal those things were.
Yeah. Travis said on our message board, God bless America and God bless our veterans and God bless those families of those that their family members paid the ultimate sacrifice.